So about a couple months ago we got the announcement of the World 12s, not to be confused with World Rugby 12s, as they are definitely not currently affiliated. A 12-a-side rugby tournament set to take place in 2022, with organisers claiming it will bring in a whopping £250 million into the sport over the next 5 years, which is a bold claim. They also say that there will be a women's version of this concept launched in 2023 with equal prize money for both genders, and the goal set out by the organisers is to have 192 of the world's best rugby players from Tier 1 and Tier 2 nations to be involved, with players auctioned off to 8 franchise teams, which I like the idea of having the event help to bridge the gap between the Tier 1 and 2 players. The team squads would be decided by auction following a similar format to the Indian Premier League and 100 cricket, and would likely be staged in early 2022. Each franchise will have to select 2 players from Tier 2 nations, as well as 1 international under-20 player for their squad of 24. There will be 6 forwards and 6 backs in a team rather than the 8 forwards and 7 backs that we're usually accustomed to. Matches will be 15 minutes each way rather than 40, and in knockout games, if there is a tie at full time, the winner will be decided by a golden point. There would also be a couple of law adaptations, including conversions having to be drop goals, only 1 scrum reset will be permitted, with a free kick awarded after that, and penalties from scrum infringements can't be kicked at goal. This tournament would be organised so that matches would be played over 3 weekends with 2 round-robin weekends followed by a knockout stages to determine rankings from 1st to 8th. In the organisers' attempt to address player welfare concerns, there will be a limit on game time for each player, with a proposal of players being restricted to 60 minutes across the 3 weekends, which, if games are 15 minutes each way, and you're doing a round robin of 8 teams over the first 2 weekends, and people are paying to see the best of the best playing, questions for later. Anyway, discussions of where this tournament will take place are still ongoing, but organisers aim to stage the 2022 tournament over 3 weeks in late August/early September in England, with it moving to different locations around the world each year. But NGJ, the season usually starts in England in late to mid-September, with pre-season games starting even earlier. Well, my enthusiastic little friend, those are questions for later. Or not at all, just focus on this sick pitch. Anyway, those involved in this venture are former RFU Chief Executive Ian Ritchie, who's the World 12's chairman, with Gareth Davies, former WRU chairman, and Steve Tew, former NZRU CEO, as non-executive directors, which is a fancy business people word for supposed independent consultants for this business, who are being paid to give balanced advice to this business on how they do things. But I do wonder how balanced you can be when it's actively in your interest for them to go ahead with their plans. It would take someone very ballsy or very stupid to be in that position and go, you know what, let's sack this off. No one who's actually a rugby fan wants this, and it's potentially a minefield for player welfare and contractual red tape and trust with the rugby union fandom as a whole. But anyway, the tournament is backed by a UK-based financial consortium. Ooh, fancy. But as of yet, there are no details of who makes up this consortium or how much money is involved, which is less fancy and more, intriguing, slightly ominous. I understand it's a common business practice to not put your name to something you're financially backing until you see what their response to the product is like, but it doesn't fill me with confidence in their vision. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong. When asked about the World 12's launch, Chairman Ian Ritchie stated, "World 12s is a natural evolution of rugby union. We feel that it is a game for our changing, fast-paced world that can excite a global fan base in the way that we've seen with the IPL, or more recently, the 100 cricket, in bringing together the most exciting players under the stewardship of some of the brightest rugby minds with commercial backing. We are looking to propel rugby forward and lay a positive roadmap for how the game is perceived for future generations. Early and informal discussions with World Rugby unions, clubs and player associations have been constructive, and in announcing today we can continue our consultative conversations and collaborations with relevant stakeholders." Now, there's a lot to unpack there. But before I do that, I must inform you of the other people involved in this venture, with Rugby World Cup winning coaches Steve Hansen and Jake White being ambassadors for World 12s. And when the three of Hansen, White and Ritchie were questioned about why they have decided to launch a new rugby tournament, Ritchie stated that all sport needs innovation, to adapt, to attract new people, to watch, to be fast, exciting, innovative and entertaining. That's what we believe World 12s will bring to the party. It's a new model with new investors and finance coming into the sport, and it's complementary, not competitive. We believe it's a huge step forward globally for the sport. Hansen stated that we probably got a little complacent about our game. The World 12s will get people excited and move people from the back seats to the front. The concept allows us to play the game fast and for it to be about skill. And White pointed to the fact that the financial benefits of this 3-week tournament could encourage players to stay in their home countries and play for domestic teams rather than seek overseas contracts, which I'm assuming indicates that either they are going to be throwing some serious money at players to participate in a 3-week tournament, or it means they've contradicted themselves, as it's a touring event, moving location every year, and all the plans aren't concrete, so they don't know quite yet what they're doing. But I'm going to assume it's the former, because to pull this off, they're going to need, in terms of players, the best of the best to be participating in this, otherwise it's just not going to work. And since I've already started kind of talking about this, let's talk about the potential issues this concept might have. First, and the reason I believe that they need to be throwing some serious cash at the top players in the world, is because of the lack of brand recognition. All the teams will be new and all of the squads will be done by a draft, so it's going to have an all-star feel, yes, but there probably won't be any loyalty to any of the teams from the start. Starting teams from scratch and building fan bases is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Ask any of the Welsh regions or even the Super Rugby franchises when they started out. Sports clubs / franchises / whatever you even want to call them, a lot of the time rely heavily on the my mum and dad used to support or took me to the game style of marketing, for want of a better term. I play rugby because my dad played. I support Wasps because my dad played for them in the amateur days, as well as taking me to games when it was in Wembley or at Adams Park. Same with England. That's why I care, and that's why I will pay money to watch Wasps on TV or buy a ticket. With the literal 8 new teams, it's going to be like when I invest my time in a new league. You're just going to pick a team that you like with either a cool kit or your favourite players. Shouts out to Western Force, Suntory Sun Goliath, ST Legion and Newport Gwent Dragons. You're all my boys. Only instead of just one insignificant internet fanboy doing that, it will be everyone doing the same thing without the backing of any history or like a local city or area. And I like those teams, but it's not that deep. At least not enough that I would spend any kind of money on them specifically. Then imagine if those teams had a completely different roster every year. There's legit zero incentive for long-term investment in any of them, so that's one issue. The second, and maybe even biggest one, is player release. The supposed timing of like mid to late September currently clashes with the start of the season in Europe and the Rugby Championship in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's hard to see clubs and unions releasing their biggest players for the World 12s, while organisers are keen to insist that it won't dilute or detract from any existing competition or investment. There are concerns that it will. I think the only way that we could get this to work would be with a world calendar for the rugby season and World Rugby's collaboration, and spoilers for this video, that seems unlikely. World 12 said that they have had informal discussions, very interesting choice of words, with World Rugby, unions, clubs and other stakeholders about the tournament, and World Rugby spokesperson responded saying, "We are aware of the proposed new World 12s competition. While we welcome innovative thinking with the potential to advance the reach and attractiveness and growth of the sport, comprehensive consultation with the organisers is required to understand the viability of the concept, particularly in the context of ongoing global calendar discussions and the priority area of player welfare," which is effectively them saying, yeah, nah. Now this could all change if the money's right, because that's just the way things are in business, but it would have to be some pretty intense figures to pull this off. And then the third issue is the question of whether a new format of the game is needed. The most recent example of a variant of Rugby Union was Rugby X, which, if you don't know, it was an indoor kind of mash of elements of sevens and some fun new concepts, launched by former Fiji gold medal winning sevens coach Ben Ryan, where they got together sevens international teams and a barbarian squad of both men and women to compete on a day, and the event was promoted as a new exciting version of rugby that can change the landscape of the game and be great for growing the game around the world as a new high-tempo, easy-access version of the sport. And they did their event, and that was it. Now, a lot of people I've spoken about it just saw it as a, for want of a better term, this seems harsh, but cash grab that long-term no one cares about, which is kind of the brush that the World 12s is being painted with. But in researching for this video, I discovered that Ben Ryan was responding to people on Twitter calling out both Rugby X and the World 12s for just being cash grab style events using the game of rugby. In these responses, he was claiming that Rugby X will return, and we will have to wait and see on that. They do have the excuse that COVID ruined their plans for another event, so I guess you'll just have to keep an eye on that. But I do have a slight bone to pick with variants of Rugby Union and the intent behind variants in general. Rugby Union has a sibling sport named Rugby League, and a variant for their sport launched in a similar way to our World 12s is being launched, with it being an event style format with round robin games, but just with established franchise being invited to come and play, this being Rugby League 9, which has produced some great highlights. And if you were in favour of the World 12s, you could argue that this would be Rugby Union's version of this. Except, number one, Rugby 9s has a long-term greater goal of getting Rugby League to be an Olympic sport to further grow their game, which I doubt anyone would argue that that's the long-term vision for 12s. Also, and more obviously, we already have a variant of rugby union that produces the viral clips and is a high-tempo, easier access version of the sport. That's already broken ground by getting our game into the Olympics, called Sevens, and it's mostly accepted. And I think that's what makes all, or at least most of these attempts for a new variant feel hollow. They mostly feel unnecessary. Like the 100 in cricket, which ironically the World 12s wants to kind of base themselves on. Genuinely, nobody I know cares. We already have T20. So you can sort of rule out, or at least justifiably be very skeptical when organisers claim these things are about growing the sport, and see it for what it usually is. Just a business idea involving, or as some people would say, using rugby. And if your argument is about how variants can actually be a great way of getting people who don't usually like rugby into it, here's my 2 cents. Variants aren't really a way to get people into the game, in my opinion. They're a reason to stay in it. In my experience, people love sevens because they started off playing 15s, and they kinda liked it, but playing and training in the mud on a Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday wasn't really as enjoyable as when you're, let's say, 16 and under. But playing sevens in the summer when it's hot and you can play expensive rugby and do all the things that make rugby fun, that's something you can commit to and keeps people playing. The main sport is always going to be what gets people into the game because that's just how things work usually. And when a variant does get people into the sport, it's going to be the main variant, like T20 or sevens, not the newest offshoot of the sport. So respectfully, when organisers, sponsors or whoever say it's going to bring new people into the game, again, respectfully, they're just incorrect. And just so I can really hit my point home, ask yourself when and what was the last time you got interested in a new sport. Then ask yourself how you got into it. Last 2 sports I got into were American football and basketball. And was it 3-on-3 or the women's version of American football in the bikinis that got me into the sport? No, because I have to like the original first before I can even get into the variants. Is it 5-a-side footy that brings people to football? No, it's the main 11-a-side game, and then I play the 5-a-side as a way to play the game and not take it too seriously. Variants are a fun way to keep people around at best, and at their worst they're a waste of time, straight up. But even in the best case scenarios, you're still only marketing to your own fans. And that's probably why people are jaded in their response to the new variants now. Because a lot of the time it just feels like repackaging something that we already liked in a new and maybe even slightly worse way, and telling you that it's the new thing that's going to change the way the sport is viewed. When in reality it's just not that. It's up to them now to prove me wrong. If they're actually doing this to create a new vision and version of rugby to grow the game, well, I guess they got 5 years to prove me wrong. But I think now it's okay to be skeptical because, well, as a fandom, we have good reason to be. I think let's sit tight and see how it goes. If it goes well, I'll be happy. And if it goes wrong, and if it's what I think it is, then I'll be right. It is what it is. Signed NG.